Well, thank you very much. We came in from Arizona reluctantly because we hated to give up snow and rain. I don't know, when I was here full time, I don't remember the weather being this good this early in the season. It's not even playoffs yet. Neither do you, is right. I'm happy to be here. In a moment I'll tell you about the program, but I'd like to first say something about John Roberts. I, like a lot of us, have had the opportunity to be a student of John Roberts, and I always was fascinated at how he could walk into a classroom, stand up, and never work off a lesson plan. I mean, it looked like he had no notes. And it looked like he had a monologue that he was doing. And I said, this class, you just got to love this class because we're going to hijack it. And we actually thought we could hijack the class and just ask him about contemporary issues in radio and television. The reality of it is that after I graduated and had an opportunity to have a real conversation with him, I found out that I said, you know, we loved your class because we felt that we could keep you from going to the lesson plan and that we could keep you going and you were entertaining us. And he said, yes, that too. And I didn't understand what he meant until he explained his philosophy. And his philosophy was that he was going to come in, do an opening monologue. I mean, the guy's a television guy. He's one of us. He likes an audience. But he waited until he could get us to ask him to teach what he had already planned to teach. Now, I know this is true, and I was fortunate enough to spend a number of years as a professor of music industry and generational media at University of Southern California. Believe me, I never wanted to teach. I didn't know how to teach. I'm sure my students wouldn't want me to teach after having had me. But I wrote John Roberts a letter. And in the letter, I said to him, I want you to know that you will go on to yet another generation through me. And he's saying to himself, this guy barely got out of my class probably, and he's teaching. And I said, I'm going to do what you did. I'm going to stand up, I'm going to do an opening monologue, and I am going to let them beg me to teach them what I had already planned to teach them by using the stuff in my opening monologue. And it was a wonderful thing that I'm happy I had an opportunity to do. Isn't it wonderful to live over 90 years and give so much to so many people? We're all so honored. I know this every time we come back to Philadelphia and every time we're with broadcasters, what a special group this is. But for John Roberts, for me personally, and for those of us who remember him, we will remember him fondly for a long time to come. My friends, I am the least of you. I have worked at practically every station there is to work at. In this market, I've worked for Channel 6 before Kathy Gandolfo, but not before Mike Strug. Not as much talent, that's for sure. And I have had the opportunity of being here for the format change on WFIL. And I've worked at WIBG, thanks to Uncle Bill, and I thanked him personally again. First guy who let me sit in on a radio show if I didn't have the bug bad enough before I got a chance to go to the old Wibbage. And I worked for the new Wibbage as well. There's a lot of stories with that. And I programmed Wi-Fi 92. Mel's radio station that he sold to General Cinema. And I programmed WIBG. I'm a guy who can't hold a job, but I have learned a lot about this city, and it's one of the reasons why my wife and I are looking to come back, and that is that it's a very, very special place. And I was honored to be able to welcome some people that I know and some that I don't know from WIP to share with you this radio station, an amazing radio station that really hardly ever had a time when it wasn't successful in some way, shape, or form. It's a station that reinvented itself over and over again. So what we're going to do today, with your cooperation and your indulgence, is that we are going to give you kind of a flavor of WIP from, believe it or not, back in the 40s when and of course, when I heard it was the 90th anniversary of WIP, and Jerry said, I want you to be there because you were there from the beginning. I said, no, Jerry, that was not me. But we have people who were there back when it was Ben Gimbel that owned the radio station, before Metro Media. And we have distinguished people from Metro Media, and we have stars from Metro Media, and we have news people from Metro Media. And if I haven't mentioned it, yes, I worked at WIP as well. And I have some stories about that that will show you why they could do a lot better. But I did so much better for having been there at that radio station. So we're going to do that. And we have Howard's with us today. He's history of the radio station. He's been there for sports right from the beginning, is there still today. So I think it's going to be interesting because we're going to hear these stories that are going to give us a flavor of how a radio station could be this remarkable, not only for its listeners, but for those of us who've had an opportunity to work there. But first, I would like to introduce a person who's a senior vice president for CBS and responsible for WIP Radio to this day, to come up and say a couple of words. Will you give a nice round of applause to Mark Rayfield?
Thank you, Jerry. I also wanted to acknowledge John Roberts. John has touched more than one generation of broadcasters and journalists in this town. When I was an undergraduate at Temple University, John oversaw a magazine that a group of students, including myself, called Philadelphia People in 1984 launched. And he was instrumental in keeping me directed, and it ultimately led me to Jack Hyland, who many of you might remember, where I worked as an intern at WFIL when I was in college with a couple of people who are in this room, right, Mel? I also wanted to acknowledge the current members of the WIP family who are here today. Our great chief engineer, Ben Hill. Our great program director at WIP, Jeff Sotolano. And some guy named Howard. Oh, Eskin, sorry about that. Winning in Philadelphia. It's what WIP has been doing since it signed on almost 90 years ago, to the day I might add, March 17th, 1922, how ironic, St. Patty's Day. What started as a promotional vehicle for the Gimbels Brothers department store, and I remember the Gimbels Brothers chain as a child, has evolved into one of this country's greatest and most important radio stations, with many stops and formats in between and along the way. While my relationship with WIP officially began when Scott Mays and the late, great Tom Brookshire hired me to be the local sales manager of the all-new sports station in 1990, it really began about 20 years earlier. It was then, as a youngster, that I went to a Wee Willie Weber store appearance where I took a picture sitting on his lap, but more on that later. Today, it doesn't seem to be such a great risk to be a part of the great WIP management team. But back then, my sanity was questioned by more than a few friends and coworkers who wondered what future this new, unproven format called sports talk radio, being broadcast 24 hours a day, could possibly have. In fact, I frequently heard, "Rayfield, are you serious? It will never work." When I told my late father that Brookie wanted to see me, I asked him what to do, and like the passionate, lifelong Philadelphia sports fan that he was, he told me not to be a schmuck and go for the interview. Admittedly, I was enamored at the opportunity to work with Bill Campbell and Howard Eskin. After all, I didn't really know Howard at that point. That's changed, and I do love him. And learn under one of the industry's greatest programmers, Tom Bigby, the man who really deserves much of the credit for WIP's success as a sports radio station. And so I took the job. It was a love-hate relationship from the beginning. I loved talking sports all day and even convinced Charles Barkley to do a season-long radio show, which Howard Eskin hosted. But the big egos and politics were too much for a know-it-all kid to take. As a salesperson at Power 99 FM, I knew that records didn't talk back. At WIP, they trashed your office. I left WIP, that's an inside joke. Some people here will understand that. I left WIP to join KYW News Radio's management team as local sales manager, which was a lateral move at the time, but one that would allow me to finish my graduate studies and resume a more normal life. 2 years later, Infinity Broadcasting purchased WIP, and 3 years after that, Group W, now called CBS, purchased Infinity Broadcasting. In 2003, when CBS CEO Joel Hollander called me to tell me I was going to take over as general manager at WIP, I thought I was being punished. The same passion and craziness was still there. It would take a few years and a few lumps to understand that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And it has been there these past 9 years where I have learned my best life's lessons. We took WIP into the digital age. We took Wingbowl to Hollywood, where it was optioned for a major motion picture, which was never produced. And we made the painful decision to sunset WISP to rightfully introduce WIP to a whole new generation on the FM, which we did Labor Day weekend of last year. A few years ago, we were having some sort of celebration at WIP, and we invited many of our old WIP family members to join us. There was Bill Weber, who I had not seen in more than 35 years. I told him about my experience as a child and showed him the picture, which I have since misplaced. I know I have it somewhere, but I've misplaced it. And he told me to sit on his lap to complete the circle. And so we took another picture, which I have. Many of you are here because you have your own special connection to WIP. It is you, and not the calls or the formats or the dial positions, that are WIP. And it is you that we are here to salute and celebrate. Congratulations on your 90th anniversary, and thank you for being such a special part of this great big family. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it very much. Well, we're going to do this this march through time, but the Eagles are going to have a news conference, and Howard Eskin must leave because he's still working at WIP. And what I'd like to do is I think we can hear from him first so he can cover the Eagles, and then we'll step back and we'll go through the history of WIP. Will you welcome Howard Eskin?
You know, it's really great to see people that were part of my years before radio, people who were part of my years after radio and actually television. Even though sometimes it's difficult to work for Mark Rayfield, I enjoy it for all the years that we've worked together at WIP. When you think about staying, and I know people have been at the same stations and the same job for many years, the amount of years that I've been there is just staggering, and I don't want to leave. I remember, and the good thing is, I was part of the transition from one to another. Before I get that, I want to tell you Tim Tebow was traded to the Jets just because I can't help myself with news. And the Saints were fined, the coach is suspended for the year, the assistant for at least a year, and they got fined $500,000 and lost draft picks. I can't stop myself from doing the things that I've done all these years. But I remember that, and some people may remember, I did sports talk on an FM station, WWDB. Then I went to Channel 3 in 1982. Still did some things at WWDB. And then in 1986, I went to Channel 29. I was the first anchor for their 10 o'clock news that they hired, first anchor they hired. I was the sports anchor. And there was a fellow by the name of Mike Craven, and anybody in this business should remember Mike. I knew Mike when I was an engineer at WFIL Radio, spinning records for Jim O'Brien and George Michael. And it was such an important part of my career. Everything that I've done gets me to the WIP days and beyond. So still was friends with Mike, and it was only at 10 o'clock news, so Mike asked if, number one, if I'd do some commentaries for MMR. They were both owned by Metro Media, MMR and WIP, back in like 85, 86. And I went to Channel 29 in 86. And then when I was at Channel 29, he says, you know what? I've really thought about this radio station as an all-sports radio station. This is Mike. And he said, would you do sports talk in the afternoon. This was August 20, it was in probably right before August. And I said, sure, I've done it before. I'd love it. I have a 10 o'clock news. I've got time. So I did an hour in the afternoon with the urging of Mike Craven. August 29th, 1986 was the first sports talk show on WIP. Now remember, I'm part of that transition from the glory days, and I still will call what WIP was before sports talk, the glory days, which now there's new glory days. So I did that, and then things started to fall into place. And another part of the history, and I remember where I was sitting. Art Camiolo, who people remember is, as a gentleman that's been part of this business for many years. He called me, he said, do you think WIP can make it as a sports talk station? And I forget what year, it was probably 88-ish. And I said, yeah, I really do. So he said, all right, let's talk. We go to the Old Continental, which was just a breakfast place at 2nd and Market. Sat down there, and we talked for 3 hours. And after the discussion, he says, let me talk to Ed Snyder. Ed had, I think, already owned, WIOQ at one point before that, and Art would buy radio stations for Ed Snyder. So I'm going to talk to Ed, and I think it's a good idea. Eventually, Spec Decor bought the radio station from Metro Media. And so through all this, I see all these things going on. Ed Snyder, his famous words is, that was my Frankenstein, WIP. He owned it, yet we killed him when they stunk. It was kind of an interesting dynamic. So through those years, there's a lot of things that evolved. Tom Bigby eventually came in. Then, as Mark told you, Mark came in. But it was so fascinating and so important for me to watch this transformation of what this radio station became and what it is now. And I will, for the rest of my years that I share with the people here, that I share with the people on the air, that I share with the people out there, whether I get a double bogey on the hole or not, I will never forget all the things that happened along the way. 25 years doing afternoons at WIP is amazing. And thankfully, and I wanted to do this, and the radio and CBS let me do it, and Mark approved it. When we decided, and it's still a we, I still enjoy really working. I just love working for the company, and I love working for WIP. And I said, listen, they were going to change to FM on the Monday or the Tuesday after Labor Day. And what I decided that, I was going to try some new things and stay at WIP, and we both embraced that. I said, can I do the first show on FM? And it just, maybe it's for me and nobody else, did the first sports talk show on 610 WIP, and I did the first sports talk show on 94 WIP. And if nothing else happens in my career, for the rest of my career, I will never forget all the things that I've done at WIP, the people I've worked with at WIP, the people that worked at WIP before me. And by the way, I saw Bill Weber. He was showing Popeye cartoons at Gimbel's, Cheltenham, and I went over to see Bill Weber. Man, I'm going to work at the station that Bill Weber worked at. And I still remember the Popeye cartoons. It's just because he did a show, I guess, at Channel 6, cartoon show, and at WIP. But all the things that happened, I'll give you a quick Brookshire story, and then we'll move on. Tom was one of the management people. He, with Ed Snyder's, obviously, encouragement, came into the radio station. And Tom did, as people know, broadcast for CBS NFL football. Terry O'Neill, I'm pretty sure that name's correct, wrote a book. And I love Tom. We didn't agree on a lot of things. You can't be ripping the Eagles. They're on our air. I said, Tom, it's my opinion. Come on, man, it's my opinion. So Terry O'Neill was on the air, and one of the things he had written in the book, fairly or unfairly, that when Tom Brookshire worked with Pat Summerall, it was like cocktail hour when it was a 4 o'clock game. So I had Terry O'Neill on, and obviously, it's in the book. I have to ask him the story. And I don't know if Mark even knows this. So Terry O'Neill's on. Tom Brookshire calls in on the hotline. I want to go on the air, tells the producer. I said, I can't ambush the guy. Tell Howard I want to go on the air. I never let him do it. I'm surprised I had a job after that. And I said, Tom, after it was over, I said, Tom, I can't ambush the guy. It was about the book. So there's all little tidbits and stories in all the years, and I could be here for days and days and days to talk about them. But I will tell you this, even though in every walk of life, in every job, there's some tough moments, but the great moments far surpass anything that could have been a tough moment in my time at WIP, and I'm sure in my time in the future at WIP. And it's an honor to be a part of this. Even though I don't always agree with Mark, I really do love working for him, and I'm glad that he has stayed, and we are still a part of what is a major, major, major success of a radio station here in the city of Philadelphia. And thank you very much. Now I've got to go see the New Eagles linebacker, which, by the way, between 6 and 10 tomorrow, they'll find some way to rip the guy. But thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Don't you love I love that description you had of the glory days and the new glory days. How many radio stations can you say that about? So that's phenomenal. Good luck to you. All right, so, I've got to tell you why I'm here. I mean, I worked for WIP too, and I may not be a household name. And before I say anything else, I've got to tell you that there are people who are not here today, and we're making reference to them again, and we will probably make reference to others before the time is over, and that is Bill Weber, of course, and Ken Garland is not here, and Nat Wright, the all-night night rat who worked with me, and I'll explain in a second, a wonderful human being who really had a lot of empathy to a young guy just starting out in a lane that was really too fast. But I must tell you that I worked in WIP News, and you're going to hear some news stories. News was not my thing. I mean, I thought it was my thing, but it wasn't. And it was WIP that helped me discover that I wanted to be a program director, that I cared about content. And I went on to do those things and spend my life writing about content and teaching about it. But I was fortunate enough to get an interview with Paul Rust, who was the news director there, a fabled news director, a tough military man. My father was a military man, so I figured, well, I can't be afraid of this guy. Until you meet him, and you walk in, and you're a really young guy from Temple, and Temple cut both ways. A lot of times, it's a great education for us. Many of us have a Temple education, but sometimes if you were being interviewed, when you were interviewed, people would say, oh, you're a Temple grad, that means you know everything. And that's true, it's been said a number of times, and I said, oh no, I'm here to learn with you. So I took the audition, and didn't think I had much of a chance to get the all-night news job. But I wrote the news, I did the audition. He listened to it in front of me. I didn't like it when he was playing it back. He turned around, he says, your voice is pretty good. I know that mattered in those days. The news is not bad, which I guess was a compliment. I'm still in. And he said, we have an opening. It's on the all-night show. I said, that'd be wonderful. I love all night, which is not true. And but he said, there's one thing. He said, I looked at your resume here, and I've called some of your references. And one of your references was not they did not have favorable comments. And who would do this? I mean, you wouldn't put references down that you thought were questionable. You get people are in the bag for you. And as it turned out, I was stunned. I said, there it is. The opportunity to work at WIP is over. And Andy, you and I worked together at WIP. You probably don't even know this story, but I was just crushed over. I said, well, I'm sorry to hear that. And Paul, who was a very interesting man, said, he's an idiot anyway. You're hired. So I had the opportunity to get the job. And as you'll hear later, I mean, he's a guy that wanted news to come alive. He wanted to hear the sound of news. He wanted actualities, and he beat us up to get sound. And, you know, you could not get enough sound for this man. One time there was a fire going on in one of these big box stores. I can't remember what it was, Kmart or whatever at the time. And I said, all right, I'll fix Paul. I'll call the store. It's on fire. I'll call, see if anybody answers. Ask for the camera department. And I did. I called the store, asked for the camera department, and I said, do you have a fire? And he's coughing, and he says, yes. He says, there's a fire in the store. He says, I'm going to have to leave. And I'm thinking, well, you can't leave until you give me the soundbite that I need for Uncle Paul. And I got it and put it on the air. And then I was emboldened. I went back to him and said, look, I can get sound. And every opportunity to present news through sound is what we needed to do. One day I showed up for my all-night shift at 11:30 at night, and the doorman at the Wellington building, as I remember it, where WIP was at the time, said, you can't go out that door over there. Why? He said, someone jumped out the window. And I'm thinking, I'm sorry to hear that, but, you know, I always had to rewrite all the old news all night long, so I got in a news story here. So we covered the news story. Next day, Paul calls me, and he says, what's the matter? What's the matter with you? You didn't get any sound. And I said, Paul, the guy is dead. He's on the street. Call the police. You know, you could never please the guy. But, you know, he was right. He wanted, couldn't interview the body, but call the police. Call somebody, interview somebody, and bring it to life. And that's what he did. So I must say about WIP, it engaged its listeners. It engaged the people who worked there. Everyone who passed through had an opportunity to grow. And as you're going to see now, as we go on, and Howard, it's beautiful how he said that. We're going to talk about the Gimbel days, the Ben Gimbel days, but we're also going to talk about the Metro Media days, which is what a lot of us refer to as the glory days because we were there. And then the reincarnation of WIP again in the new glory days, just phenomenal. So what I'd like to do is, and this is going to be a learning process for me too, because when I found out that Jerry put together the speakers for this program, and I had an opportunity to, that'll be second, and I had an opportunity to email or talk to the people who are going to participate, I realized that we're in for something very special. I don't know what the days were like before Metro Media. I didn't work there. I wasn't old enough to understand it. But we do have someone here who did work there from 1949 to 1958. And his name is Mel Golub, or Mel Stewart to you. Let's welcome him up and hear his story.
My memory is not quite as good as it used to be. I had a heart bypass, and probably you've heard about Lipitor affecting your memory. Well, I'm a constant user of Lipitor, so I said to my physician, my memory is not quite as good as it used to be. He said, now make a decision. Remember or live longer. So, pardon me, I have a script. Okay. I was a WIP announcer for 9 years, from 1949 to 1958. And during this period, the station was licensed to the Pennsylvania Broadcasting Company, Benedict Gimbel Jr., the president and general manager. Now, the station was located at 35 South 9th Street. The building was part of Gimbel Brothers department store at 9th and Market. Now, the original station owner, just to go into history, was Gimbel Brothers department store and first went on the air March 17, 1922 as Philadelphia's first commercial radio station. There might have been stations before that went on, but they were not commercial, hence the slogan, Philadelphia's Pioneer Voice. The broadcast originated from the top floor at 35 South 9th Street, a spacious studio area, 3 medium-sized studios, 1 mega-sized studio to accommodate an audience. The huge master control room also housed the FM transmitter, which fed the roof antenna tower, 20,000 watts at 93.3 FM. The 5,000 watt AM signal at 610 on the dial was transmitted from Belmar, New Jersey. By the way, Mr. Gimbel was a stickler for formality. During the Monday through Friday 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. business hours, all broadcast personnel had to be dressed in a business suit with proper shirt and tie. Now, during my 9-year WIP stay from 1949 to 1958, I was pleased to work with John Facenda, Joe McCauley, Jack Pyle, Mac McGuire, Bob Menifee, Dan Curtis, Paul Sullivan, John Paul Weber. Now, my last few years' announcing hours were a bit cumbersome. Each week consisted of 3 daytime shifts plus 2 all-nighters. I was the relief announcer for the Dawn Patrol. I'm certain some of our senior members recall John Pierce singing the Bluebird of Happiness 2 times during each program. I hope it inspired our listeners to stay awake. And I was a disc jockey on the Dawn Patrol from 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. My shift ended an hour and a half later with my announcing a live commercial, also a station break at 7:30 a.m. Quite often I dozed off in the announcer's lounge, thanks to John Paul Weber, who gave me a wake-up shake at 7:20 a.m. One of the higher paid WIP personalities, who shall be nameless, pulled an on-the-air boner which rattled our program director, Murray Arnold. Murray ran into the studio and proclaimed to him, "I hope Ben Gimbel didn't hear you, or we'll both be fired. Don't do it again." And what did this personality say that was upsetting? It was, WIP in the Gimbel building. Thank you and good day.
Thank you, Mel. We have on the phone from Boca Raton, Florida, Alan Hotlin, who was a program director in the glory days at Metro Media. Alan, are you there?
I'm here, Jerry.
It's a
How are
pleasure.
you? Is there a lot of feedback?
So tell me about your lunch with Robert Goulet.
Okay, well, first of all, I have to acknowledge the John Roberts thing real quickly. I'm not going to do a monologue here, or a long monologue, but I, too, was at Temple when he was head of the department, and I owe so much to him. I just hope his soul rests in peace. There's no easy way to transition from that to the Robert Goulet story, but I want to also, maybe as a way of transitioning, say that as a native Philadelphian, going to work at WIP, Dick Carr hired me in early 64, was the most thrilling thing that ever happened to me in broadcasting. And I had a pretty good run, but it's still hard for me to believe what kind of rush there was to be part of a station that I idolized and over the years to get to be friendly with and know and respect so many great people. But anyway, Dick was, I lived at the Dorchester at the time, which is right across the park from the Wellington where the studios were. And Dick lived in Gladwin, as I recall. So he had a car and I didn't. And he was famous for what we used to call the 50-50 deal, where he would say, "Why don't you go 9 rounds with Rocky Marciano? What will you be doing, Dick? I'll be making sure that the towels are ready to be thrown in." So he was pretty good at that. And so he said, "Look, Robert Goulet is going to be doing a show for us today. Why don't you take my car and pick him up?" A little background on that. Dick had started a thing that I thought was terrific and still do, called Music Spectaculars, where any major artist other than Sinatra was pretty much gettable. They would come in and do a live show with a full orchestra, full band, for the advertising and client community. And we'd tape it and run it back on the air as a music special. So Goulet was the guy. So Dick had a green 1968 Cadillac. I remember took the car, drove down to the Bellevue Stratford, I think it was, and announced at the desk, and they said, "Come up." And Carol Lawrence opens the door. And it was his wife, and she looked right out of central casting, hair up in curlers like a quilted robe, and I thought to myself, this is going to be a long wait. She said, "No, Robert's ready, Bob," and he comes out of the other room, and he looks If ever I didn't understand, if ever I needed proof that the 8x10 glossy line people used about him was true, this was the time. He looked absolutely incredible. It's like 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning. So I'm smiling to myself, and there are dishes all over the place in bottles, but he looks like he's right out of a bandbox. So we walk out together, and he's got a roadie, a guy with him. We get into Dick's car, and we drive back west onto Walnut Street to go to the Warwick where we're going to do the show. And Goulet is sitting in the back, and he's very recognizable. Even now he would be. I know he's not alive, but I mean, his face was, then he was at the peak of his career. He's leaning out the window and shouting at every good-looking woman, and there were many of them, "Hey, baby," all kinds of things. I said, "Bob, excuse me, I want to tell you something. Lean in, would you?" And then as soon as he did, I raised the power windows and locked it. I said, "I live here. I don't need this." He was great. So we get to the Warwick, and it's a few hours before the show, and I'm supposed to produce the thing. So I'm talking to him, and there's a bar there. And he said, "Let's get a drink." And I had never in my life had a drink that early in the morning, but I said, "Sure, I'm in show business." So he offers a vodka. Bottom line, he must have had, and this is no exaggeration, at least a dozen drinks before the show. And I can see my career dying. I'm telling him, here's the people I want you to say hello to and thank, and here's why you're here. He doesn't seem to be listening. And I'm trying my best not to be overbearing, but to make sure that he at least has a clue and catches some of the drift. He just keeps drinking, and I'm thinking, how does he do this? Anyway, bottom line, the show goes on. He doesn't miss a thing. Everything I had said to him, he did. He greeted everybody perfectly, sang every song perfectly. It was the most incredible performance I've ever seen for somebody not in great shape. Last part of the story goes on. I take him to lunch at Bookbinders. Two parts of the story. The old original Bookbinders, and people are coming over to the table, and he's extremely gracious to everybody. We finish lunch, walk across, if you remember, there's a parking lot across the street, and walk across the street, and a Ford Country Squire station wagon pulls up, and there's script on the side. It's Sisters of Mercy, or some Roman Catholic church or hospital is who owned the Ford, and three nuns come out of the Ford, and they recognize him, and he says hello to them, and as they're walking away, he said, "I'd always wanted to be with one of them." Honest to God, I thought, this man is insane. So we take him to the station, and he sits in with Tom Brown, and this is the last part. And Tom says, or I say, "Why don't you do a commercial?" So his first commercial, it's a live spot for one of the airlines. I think it was American. His opening line was, and now a word from American Airlines. They haven't crashed any planes today. So quickly, Tom took over the commercial, and Robert and I went upstairs, and that was the end. But years later, Bob Russell and I met him, and he was the same. It was just great. But there were so many. I could go, as everybody has said, I could go on for hours. But thank goodness, and thank Dick and Dave Kroninger and all those people for making me part of the best part of my broadcasting career. Jerry?
Thank you very much. And one last thing, it did take it took a light touch, did it not, to be program director of a radio station with the type of talent you had, big name stars.
Yeah, I did, but it did take a light touch, and it all stemmed from just how much respect I had for them before I even got there. But whenever something needed to be done with a little less than light touch, this is what spoiled me for it. Every single person on that staff was such a pro, and I guess they trusted me and believed in me that I don't remember more than one minor incident in the years that I programmed or was working with Dick in the programming department. No, they were great, but maybe that's part of why they were great. I never had a staff like that again.
Thank you, my friend. Appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks for doing it. Bye.
So we've made reference to Dick. That would be Dick Carr, and he is here today. Dick Carr was, maybe, in my opinion, and I could be prejudiced because he's a friend of mine, but he is the most significant management figure at Metromedia during that period of time. And, he is an interesting fellow because he was a disc jockey and a program director who turned vice president and general manager, and he commuted up and worked at WNEW, and then he came back to WIP. So this is the guy who's going to be able to tell us what the essence of that great radio station was. Dick Carr.
There's a part part of every one of us at that radio station, I'm sure. Even if you didn't work there, there's something of all of us there. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today. I want to thank Jerry Wilkinson. I'd like to thank you, Jerry, also for being behind me coming here today. It's hard to know where to begin because I had 2 tours with that radio station. And listening to Mel, I think maybe you'd appreciate some of the early days. The company that bought WIP from Gimbel's, Ben Gimbel and his group, which included Bob Hope at the time, was Metropolitan Broadcasting. Now, Metropolitan Broadcasting Radio, in 1959, of course, the chairman was John Kluge. And John acquired Metropolitan Broadcasting as a result of the old Dumont network. Do you remember Dumont? Well, they had financial problems, and John acquired control of Dumont in those days, which would have been 1958 or thereabouts. And he immediately changed the name of the company to Metropolitan Broadcasting. Now, Metropolitan Broadcasting owned 2 television stations, WNEW-TV in New York and WTTG-TV in Washington. But it also owned 2 radio stations, WNEW 1130 in New York and WHK in Cleveland. Now, when I was a kid, a high school kid growing up on Staten Island, my favorite station was WNEW. I mean, I danced because of WNEW. I created things in my mind that had to do with, I didn't know anything about, but I knew that I had to be part of this industry somehow. Fast forward to that, in 1952, I was a walk-on freshman basketball player at St. Bonaventure University, and not very good. And because I failed to get a scholarship, I had to find a way to create some income for myself so I could pay for my education. And there was a little radio station down the road, licensed to Olean, New York, and they had an opening for a janitor. So I took the job. And that was interesting because for the next 3 years, that job in radio paid my way through St. Bonaventure. And I graduated with an economics degree and a commission, ROTC commission. But when I left, I was the morning man on that radio station. And I knew that this is the way I had to go. The Army came next, and then fast forward, I met a guy by the name of Harvey Glasscock. And Harvey took a liking to me for some odd reason. I don't know why, but he did. And he was running WHK in Cleveland, which was one of the most magnificent top 40 stations anybody has ever heard, certainly any that I had heard. And we all know WFIL, and we know WABC, et cetera, et cetera. But WHK in Cleveland was a tremendous top 40 station. And Harvey offered me a job as a DJ on WHK. And the day I reported, which was about a week or so ago, he said, after that, he said, Dick, by the way, Jack Thayer is going to replace me here at WHK. And he said, now you can come on and go to work for Jack here at WHK, or you can come with me to Philadelphia, because we just bought a station in Philadelphia called WIP. Now, this station has to be completely turned around, and I'd like you to come and join me as we go down there. Now, you don't have to take this job. You can stay with WHK, or you can come to WIP, which is only 100 miles down the road from WNEW, which you've always told me was your favorite radio station. And not only that, but I'll pay you more than we were going to pay you with WHK. So think about it. I said, no, I know what I want to do. I want to go to WIP. I remember a drive from Akron, Ohio, because at that time I was program director and morning man at a station in Akron when this discussion with Harvey took place. And I remember the drive into Philadelphia on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. And I remember just coming out of Harrisburg, and the sun just went down. And I thought, holy shit, I wonder if I can hear that radio station. And I pushed the button, and I got 610, bang, just like it did yesterday when we drove in. It came in like a local, and I thought, oh my God, the only radio station I've ever been at that you could hear after the sun went down. Well, we had a lot of decisions to make with WIP. I remember staying at the Ben Franklin that first night and getting up the next morning and walking to the station, which of course was in Gimbel Brothers, and the Ben Franklin was right across the street. And I walked up 9th Street and I thought, well, do I just go in the store here? And I did. I walked into the store and I was right in the middle of the candy department. And there was the elevator, and you took the elevator to the 12th floor. And the studios and the whole setup for WIP looked like a department store without any counters. It was intriguing. Well, we had an awful lot of fun trying to figure out what we were going to do. Do you remember WIP 610 color radio in Philadelphia? Well, the man who created that whole jingle package became a very close friend of mine. His name is Larry Green. And he's very, very seriously ill right now at Cedars-Lebanon Hospital in Los Angeles. As a matter of fact, I exchanged some email with his wife, Tony, to see how he was doing. But Larry's hanging in there. But he not only created the WIP jingle package, he created the NEW jingle package, he created the jingle packages for all the Metro media stations. And he began his jingle career by putting the package together, color radio, for Chuck Blor's station in LA, KFWB. Well, things moved along. We didn't know whether we wanted to go after WIBG with Joe Niagara and that whole gang, or whether we wanted to emulate WNEW in New York with a different standard, more adult format. And we really were conflicted. Harvey just couldn't make up his mind. And I remember when we finally decided that we were going to go in WNEW's direction. The music was coming our way, more or less. IBG had a great foothold on Top 40 at the time. But all of a sudden, there was so much music for us to play. We had Sinatra, we had Tony Bennett, we had Peggy Lee, we had all of those people. But then a guy by the name of Henry Mancini came along and gave us even more. And then Stan Getz and the Bossa Nova and that whole thing. And I thought, this is the way we got to go. Nobody's going to do this. We'll do it. And we'll target 25 to 49. That was the magic demo that we decided we were going to go after. So here I am, 25 years old, just out of the Army, not long before, newly married, the father of a little baby, still in Akron, and we're trying to figure out how we're going to do this, and I don't know where this is going to lead me to. Well, long story made short, we were very, very successful, and many of you here know the story just as well as I do. I remember really the pivot was a guy by the name of Joe McCauley, the morning mayor. I'm sorry. I got pretty close to Joe. And then came the others, Jim Tate, Tom Brown. We didn't bring Bill Weber until long after, but we had quite a lineup, and it did very well, and we grew very, very quickly. Harvey Glasscock got promoted to become the general manager at WNEW in New York, and a guy by the name of Dave Croninger came in. Now, the two greatest managers, in my opinion, all due respect to Mark, was Harvey Glasscock and Dave Croninger. And I learned from both of them. Croninger was a little bit different. Harvey looked like he had just walked out of the window of Brooks Brothers. And he smoked a big cigar, and he had a pinky rink, and he was so cool. He was so cool. If there was a parade and you wanted to be in the parade, you wanted to walk behind Harvey. Now, Croninger was a tiger. He was so competitive. And I thought, well, am I going to make it with this guy? He really wants more than I think I can deliver. But Dave made me know that I could. And he said, you know, we've got to be very, very competitive. Now, we're very strong. We're number 1, 25 to 49. But we want to be number 1 across the board. And I thought, this guy's nuts. He says, why don't you come up with a contest? Something, a little forced listening or something, that we can build audience with it. And I said, you know, there's a television station in Baltimore doing something called Dialing for Dollars. And I said, I've always been intrigued with that. Well, from that example came something called Cash Call. And I gave it the name Cash Call. And Alan Hotland came up with the music theme. And Cash Call took us a long, long way. And I'll never forget, one day I was going on a vacation, and I was driving west on the turnpike. And I never realized how important this contest was. But stations all around the country were picking it up. Now, a week before that, we had decided to create something called the Losers Club. In other words, if you were called on Cash Call and you didn't know the jackpot, you were automatically put into the Losers Club, and we'd call you back some other time. And that we had only done that like maybe 2 weeks before I was in the car on my way west. And all of a sudden, I pick up a station in Scranton, and I hear somebody else on the way down towards Washington, and they're saying, next week is Losers Club on W, whatever it was. And I thought, my God, I never realized how important this contest could be. Well, I served as PD at WIP until about 1967, when Harvey asked me to come up to WNEW, and I was program director of WNEW for a year, before John Kluge said, Carr, you're going back to WIP, you're going to be general manager, vice president, general manager. Dave Cronin is going to replace Glasscock, and you're going back to Philly. Is that okay? And I thought, oh my God, I'm having so much fun at NEW, because there was no place like it, and that's a whole other discussion. But certainly I took the job and I came back. I wasn't here more than 2 weeks before Joe McCauley died. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do now? By that time, we had Ken Garland. Ken was doing 1 to 4, and I had picked up Ken from WINS in New York when Winds went all news. And I brought Ken to WIP just before I had gone to NEW. And when I came back, I knew there was only one guy to replace McCauley, and that was Ken Garland. Then we hired Bill Weber. Next came Dick Clayton. Then Tom Moran. Tom, when did you come on board? Tom was next, and there was Tom Brown. And then Tom was doing such a good job, I think you were doing nighttime, and you replaced Tom Brown in Afternoon Drive. And the station really, really began to blossom. But because of my experience at NEW, having Giants football with a similar station to what WIP was, I thought what we really need the Philadelphia Eagles. And I was hoping I'd see Ed Snyder here today, but I have a story about Ed. Jerry Woolman and Ed Snyder owned the Eagles in those days, and they sold the team to Leonard Toews. Now I joined a country club here, or a golf club, Squires in Ambler. I don't know if you know that club. It had 100 members. It was all men, and every one of them belonged to another club for their family, and then they came to Squires to play. Well, I had a call one day from Pete Retzloff. Now, you remember Pete. Pete was one of our sports guys. And he was up for the job as GM at the Eagles. And he said, Dick, you're going to get a call from Leonard Toews about me. Please put in a good word, because I'd like to be general manager of the Philadelphia Eagles. Sure enough, I get a call from Leonard, and he says, I hear you belong to Squires. Let's play golf. And so we played golf, and I wanted to talk about the rights to the Eagles, and Leonard wanted to talk about Pete Retzloff. So naturally, I gave Pete a great glowing recommendation, and he got the job. And Pete, of course, got behind our efforts to bring the Eagles to WIP, and they had been on WCAU. But just about that time, the contract was up, and CAU, wasn't sure what they wanted to do. And I called Kluge, and I said, we need this. We need it. How much money can I come up with as far as rights are concerned? He said, I'll send you a check for $60,000. Now, in your first meeting with Toews, you go in and say, Leonard, here's a check for $60,000 for the rights agreement. He tore it up. He said, you must be nuts. So we worked it out. We negotiated a 4-year deal for the Eagles to come to WIP. And I knew that this was going to make even more of a difference, because pro football, especially at that time, because it was pre-CBS TV days, would bring huge cumes, to the radio station. If we could figure out a way to enjoy the success of audience members coming from different radio stations to hear the games on WIP, the big effort then had to be, how are you going to keep them, How do you keep them involved with the station? So we were very successful. So who's going to do the play-by-play? Well, part of the deal, I thought, was we've got to get them listening to morning sports after the Sunday game. And Charlie Swift was doing morning sports on WIP at that time. And I said, Charlie, have you ever done any play-by-play? Nope, never did. Never liked those guys. I said, you better study up, Charlie, because you and Clarence Peaks, does anybody remember Clarence Peaks? You and Clarence Peaks are going to do Eagles play-by-play on WIP. Well, I swear to God, I think Charlie almost died. He didn't have the confidence level, but he came through and he did a very good job. So Eagles football turned out to be a very important thing for WIP, as did the music format, as the personalities did, as Paul Rust and the news effort did, and Cash Call, and all the rest of it. So the next call I got was from Kluge, and he says, you're going to run WNEW-FM in New York. So wrap up things at WIP. I didn't want to leave. It was very, very difficult. We were living in Gladwin. We had a very interesting experience there. I had 4 children by this time. But we decided to make the move and went to NEW-FM. And that's my part of the story. I'm sure you all have memories of all of those days, but I want to thank Jerry again, you Jerry, and you Jerry, for inviting me here today with my wife Phyllis. There's a part of me here, and there always will be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dick. It's interesting, you talk about WIP, and as he rolls through a number of things, you think of music, you think of the personalities. Would we have forgotten to mention Cash Call? That was a big deal. And that station was associated with it for a long time. The Eagles, and I know, Dick, you've told me the story about how, and I'm such a great Flyers fan, that's one of the other reasons I'm back. You were going to tell the story about how yeah. Excuse me for just saying hi to Ed for a couple of seconds. Well, thank you for sharing that with us as well. And now, I told you I've been around this market a number of times. I ran into Dean Tyler twice, at least. Once was in the old Wibbage days, and we lived through the takeover of WIBG when Paul Drew came in and put the new format on the air that was supposed to knock FIL off. And but then I was at WIP when he joined WIP as music director and became program director. This is a man who understands the finer elements, certainly has earned tremendous esteem for being the music person he was, but he was also a phenomenal program director in that great glory day of Metro Media. And I'd like to introduce him at this time, Dean Tyler.
Thank you, Jerry. And thank you, Dick. He left out the best part. Before he left, he hired me. And, I took a lot of notes. I don't normally do that. but it's been a while since I've been there. I went there in, I think, 69 and was there till 77. Pretty good run in broadcasting. But then I had a pretty good gig. I mean, it was probably the best job in the world. I had been in business in radio for 10, 12 years before that and done all right. I was pleased with that, and I enjoyed it, and I said, as long as it's fun, I'm going to keep doing it. So I did. But it really got to be fun when I went to WIP, because I was always a believer that when you went into a new station, and I went into a lot of them, fortunately on my own volition, not because I was fired, I liked to see what was going on, who the talent was, what the music was, etc., and then build around that rather than cleaning house and starting all over again. Never liked to do that. Well, when I went to WIP, there wasn't a hell of a lot of house cleaning to do because we had one heck of a staff. But there was some refining needed. And one of the things that always amazed me in broadcasting was we're in the business of communicating, and we don't with one another. We may communicate with the audience, but inside there's a lot of turmoil, a lot of disagreements, a lot of inability to communicate. And so I came along with the memo theory, and that was to create as many memos as I could in a lifetime. And a little sidebar is that Tom Moran kept every one of the memos that I made up. But as a famous radio broadcaster would say, that's not the end of the story. The end of the story is the fire marshal came in and said, if you don't get rid of that, Moran, I'm going to shut this building down, because it was one hell of a stack. But the bottom line was that we had a staff of, and that's why I brought some notes up with me, because, you know, you get old, you start forgetting things. But Ken Garland, who was a piece of work in himself. And I'm going to concentrate a little bit on the air talent, mostly on the air talent, because an awful lot of what I was going to say has already been said. So these guys really know what they're talking about. But Ken was a very special guy. He was a terrific broadcaster, a real professional, totally committed to what he was doing, but not a real people person. He had trouble communicating one-on-one. And that, of course, was a big challenge for me. And ironically, to jump ahead, when I went up to WNEW, which is where I went after I left WIP, when I left, Ken Garland said, be careful up there, because if those guys in the air don't like you, they'll buy your contract up. And he was right. They were making so much money. Another program director didn't mean a damn thing to them, especially when it came from Philadelphia, because for some reason they always disliked Philadelphia up in the Big Apple. And I said, when I got up there, I said, well, why? I mean, you know, we're not interfering with you at all. Oh, want to bet? They just had this thing. But to get back to Ken for a moment, I knew that I was going to have some problems with him because he was very, very stiff in his beliefs and his opinions. And he was right most of the time because he agreed with me. But there were times when he wasn't. And one line that I've never been able to forget, and partly because I'm reminded of every time I go somewhere and somebody will say to me, oh yeah, I remember the story about Ken Garland. He had a tendency to be very talky. And although I approved of it, because to me, the old adage of it's what's between the music that counts, I believed in that firmly, and that's why I concentrated on AM for so many years before I really got involved in FM, simply because you had a lot more freedom. And so anyway, Ken was walking down the hall one day, and I'd only been there a short time, but we had met and conversed. And I let him get past me. He was talking to somebody else, I don't know. And I said, oh, by the way, Ken. And he turned around and he said, yeah? And I said, I just wanted to say to you that you're, I've forgotten the line already. I know you do. I know you do it. Oh, your verbosity is incurring my animosity. Now, this guy's a very illiterate guy, and he loved it. He fell down in the hallway laughing, and we were the best of friends from then on. And that's a true story. So it shows it works. And that's the way I built every radio station that I went to, and I've been very, very fortunate, largely because of the talent. And if you get to know what they're about and what their needs are, these are important things in broadcasting, or they used to be. That's why I'm retired. But they're diamonds in the rough in many cases. Some of them are already totally where they ought to be. But I just loved working with these guys that had such skills. And I wanted to pass on to you just a few things about each one of these people. By the way, Ken was so totally prepared, it was ridiculous. When he passed away, I visited his wife at home. You probably know Elaine Sonsini. And she took me into his office, and he had prepared shows for the next 2 or 3 weeks already, and he was very ill at that time. He just never quit. Then there was Bill Weber. Well, first of all, everywhere that we went, and I participated in most of the activities because I did go on the air, and I was the voice of a lot of the WIP liners and so forth. So I was involved in everything, and everywhere we went, whenever there was a picture-taking session, or if we did a telethon, they'd always put me with Bill Weber. It was like Mutt and Jeff, and when somebody said something about sitting on Weber's knee, I said, yeah, me too, I did that. But Bill was a special guy, and of course he had a long history of Philadelphia broadcasting through his TV work. And most of the people that he was playing to when he was on television were now just in the demo for WIP. And oddly enough, unlike a lot of markets, at that time, our major competition in Philadelphia, because the station was, as Dick pointed out, very successful for most of its time as a music station, was WFIL. And unfortunately, the program director against me was a pretty sharp guy named Jay Cook. Secondly, a disappointment was the fact that we were very good friends, and I hated beating his brains out, but not really. So that's part of the success of what made WIP go, was the fact that everybody had a free hand, because everywhere I worked, I was fortunate enough to always be given a free hand with the music and the air talent and anything else, although some of it was open for discussion. And fortunately, I was blessed enough that I was able to do it, and I had the people to do it with. And I could go back to the WIP days. I see Bill right over here. That was another great staff. I mean, my career in broadcasting was one hell of a ride. I really had it good. And just to prove that IP worked, I did it again on WPEN with a little different twist or two. And it was also very successful as an AM station in a major market in the era that it was in. It was unbelievable. Now we get to Dick Clayton. Dick Clayton was even zanier than Bill St. James. And Bill hates that phrase. I used to call him zany all the time. He says, stop doing that. I hate that. I don't know. What does that mean? I don't know. But Dick Clayton would do things like, we were on Rittenhouse Square at that time, and he was on the air in the afternoon. So he would often go downstairs for lunch. Not physically, just open the window, hang a string down with a hook on it, and pick up a hot dog or two at the stand on the corner. And he would, of course, enunciate all this on the air, so you knew what he was doing. Unbelievable. 4th of July, middle of the day, bright sunshine. He would do fireworks. And you'd have the sound effects of the fireworks, and he'd ooh and ah and sigh and wheeze with them. And the one that really cracked my wife up the most, I think, was when he read from the book. What book? The telephone book. He had his appropriate music in the background, and he would just say, you know, Joe Fatuzzi, Ken Garland, and just go on and on for 3-4 minutes. And it was very, very funny stuff. I could go on about him, but I better not. Then there's Tom Moran. Oh, wait a minute, he's pretty zany too, yeah. I'd ask you to stand up, Tom, but I know you already are. I can get away with that. I'm just a little bit higher than he is. Anyway, the big problem I had with Tom Moran was that he had a competitor that was bigger with the listeners than he was. Anybody know the name of that person? Now, Melvin Traub. This was a character that Tom had developed years before, and he, in fact, was Melvin Traub most of the time. He'd come into my office and do Melvin Traub. I'd say, if you don't knock it off, I'm going to pay his salary, your salary to him. And how many other voices did you do, Tom? Do you remember? You never counted, did you? Now, and if you did, you'd never... Amir Fassad. Who was the French skier? No. That's the incognito name of Joe Fatuzzi, who's my guy.
How about a still manner?
Not bad. Say what? Get out. Well, here again, I could talk for hours about Tom Moran and Dick. In fact, maybe I'll take that act on the road. Although I tried to do it in New York, just to jump ahead a little bit. When I went to WNEW, I had this brilliant idea to bring two of the funniest guys on or off the air that I ever knew, Dick Clayton and Bill St. James. We're going to put them in the morning as a team. You know, shades of Rayburn and Finch or something. Well, you know what? They got up there and they were always topping each other. There was no number two, no second banana. It was one would say something and the other guy would have to. Am I right, Bill? Yeah. Yeah, if you went long enough, that's probably true. But then we get to Tom LeMaine. Now, Tom LeMaine is a guy who well, let's put it this way. 4th of July, bicentennial, big time. Great time for IP and most of radio because we really socked it in with the money with all the new restaurants opening up and all the things that were coming to Philadelphia and all that. And we were fortunate enough to get permission to broadcast from the president's visit on the 4th of July down by the Liberty Bell. I can't remember the name of the building. I was going to go by it today to remind myself. But pardon? Roman Haas, right. And we were assigned a corner of the Roman Haas, and we set up all our equipment. We did everything from there, and we broadcast all day long from there. So it was a lot of regular radio, but we did a lot of interviews and a lot of the site stuff that we could pass on. And Tom comes in to get ready to be involved in the festivities, and he wants to get a closer look. Now, I think I have to blame him for it. Maybe it was me, I don't know. But he and I drifted down to the other end of the balcony that we were on, and I suddenly got a panic call from somebody on the other end saying, the FBI is on the phone. They want to know who those two guys on the balcony are down at the other end. And I said, well, that's us. And they said, yeah, you better get off there. They said you're in the crosshairs right at this moment. I said, well, that's okay, because they'll hit him first. But that actually happened. And on that same day, and we were also well known for some pretty heavy-duty part-time people. Don Cannon, who I think is still in the room. Yeah, Don. Always with the tan. And who was the other one I was going to mention? Joe Simone. Joe Simone, who lived in Jersey and was filling in at times, and he was on the air at that point at night. So he came in to do a show, but he got there late. And I said, where the hell have you been? And what's the matter with you? He had little not burn marks, bleed marks on his face and other body parts. It was the 4th of July, and he wanted to be in the celebration. He lived in a condo on the second floor, and so he got the idea before he left for the station to throw a firecracker out on the back lawn. Now, it was sort of similar to that yard out there in that it was all clear, beautiful grass, and tilted more. It was higher than that, but it was on the ground tilted down to the condo. So he goes out there to throw it out, lit, and he suddenly sees there's a little kid down there. And he says, oh my God, what happens if I throw it and it blows up? So he rushed into the toilet, threw it down on the toilet. Firecrackers don't care about water. It blew up and took his whole toilet with it and scraped him all up. So no wonder he was a little late for his shift. But I mean, that to me is dedication. Am I right? I don't know where I got these guys, but they were all terrific. Nat Wright goes without saying. Probably my best memories of Nat were that I was very much a workaholic to the chagrin of most people. And anything you heard about don't talk to him before 11 o'clock in the morning is not true. Right, guys? They're lying. I like to get work done in the morning. I didn't want to have interruptions from guys who were coming in and cracking wise and trying to get a raise. But anyway, I used to go in at all hours of the day and night. So I'd show up at 2, 3 in the morning on that show. And he was, first of all, he thought he was getting mugged on Rittenhouse Square. And then he realized, oh, it's only you. But we had some real good times when the mic was closed because that was my best chance to get with Nat. So I think you get the picture that we had a really happy staff. And there was no question about it, and yet there were a lot of diverse people here involved in this operation. As I said, Ken could be difficult. Oh, wait a minute. I left out Bill St. James. Who did you replace, Bill? Do you remember? I replaced you. Oh, yeah? Oh, I see. Okay. Well, you see, I was in New York. I didn't care anymore. I was in the Big Apple, baby. But I found Bill in Rhode Island. I was close. And I got this tape, and as you may have heard, I said, gee, this guy's got good pipes. I wonder how old he is. So I called and asked him. He said, I'm 19. I said, you're what? He said, 19. I said, get up here. I want to talk to you. So I had him come in, and people knew he was coming in. We were still at Rittenhouse Square. And they said, well, can we meet him? I said, I don't know. I haven't hired the guy yet. Let it be. Well, he came in. We talked. I don't know whether I hired you. I think I did that day, but I'm not sure. But after he left, they said, you're not going to hire him, are you? I said, why not? He said, he's just a kid. You know, we're an adult radio station. I said, yeah, but he doesn't sound like a kid on the air. He doesn't act like a kid, and he doesn't talk like a kid. So we hired him. Next thing I know, I'm in New York, and he's down the street from me on a competitor because he eventually left IP and went on to big things. Watch the Olympics. You'll hear him a lot. Right? Okay, I could go on forever, but I better not. So I'll let it go with that. I had some really germane things I wanted to say, but I will tell you that I have two great memories of my career in broadcasting, and it may not be over yet, so stand by. But one of them, and probably the most fond memory, was WIP. Absolutely hell of a company, and in spite of the fact, this was John Kluge's favorite radio station. I'm not even sure everybody that worked there knew that, but it was his favorite radio station. And I got on the elevator, and at the moment didn't notice that I was with his chauffeur. And we had just had lunch with him, because when he'd come into Philadelphia, John would invite the management staff to lunch. And we'd go to lunch, and he was a very down-to-earth, regular guy. But, you know, nobody can agree with everything that the man with all that money makes. So we're in the elevator. I made some comment. It wasn't all that bad, but, and all of a sudden I hear this very deep voice saying, I'm glad the boss wasn't here to hear that. And it was his driver. But I think that, you know, filtered up and filtered down. John was quite a guy. And one of the worst calls I ever had was from a stockholder of the company who called up and was ranting and raving about something we were doing on the air. I think it had to do with pigskin payoff, which nobody's mentioned, and that was a really big item for us as a promotion, tied in with the Eagles. And the guy screamed at me, well, if you don't do something about it, I'm going to call your boss. And I said, oh, yeah? Well, who would that be? He said, well, I know him personally, John Kluge. I knew immediately he didn't. And I think somebody mentioned, yes? Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. I'm surprised Bill was taking a drink of water. I'm surprised he didn't choke. He was the original embodiment of Chicken Man. When I hired him, that's the first thing I had him do. He ran around in a chicken suit throughout the city where we were doing promotions, and he hated me for it. That's what comes with no seniority. Yeah, you got that right. And he did a good job with those big red sneakers and that fluffy tail.
I wore that outfit at PEM when you brought it back.
See? You were in my, yeah, what about Chicken? He's everywhere. He's everywhere. And I'm goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. And since he mentioned the personalities at WIP, we were fortunate enough to have some of those personalities from that era. So let's hear from one of the big ones, Tom Moran.
Hello, you. Anyway, talk about the Irish and on March 17th. Hi, Kath. Kathy Gandolfo, one of my favorite people of all time. Recently retired from 6ABC. How do you like it, by the way? It's unbelievable. Huh? Would you go back?
Not a chance.
No, no way. Anyway, the station, WIP, was founded, as you heard, on St. Patrick's Day. And my claim as an Irish Catholic lad from Jersey City, New Jersey, is that the luck of the Irish fell right here. But the greatest time in my life was spent at WIP. And if that isn't the luck of the Irish, I don't know what the hell is. Another thing about this meeting today is that 3 of my children are with me. I'm not going to talk about WIP, I want to talk about my kids, okay? And one of my daughters has been to several of these luncheons. Today, I finally got the second one to show up, and my son Kevin joined them too. Kev's been here before. So I'd like you to introduce my kids. Where are they? Margie, Colette, and Kevin. The luck of the Irish, right there. And of course, my oldest son, Mike Bowe, is sitting right along with him. The time at the station was just great, and a couple of things that Dean passed along to us were very short, pithy statements that spelled out the true success of the station. Number one was keep it light, bright, and tight. It was blue skies, green lights straight ahead, positive attitude all the time. And his favorite was Pugga Mahone. I'm sorry, Dean. Anyway, did you tell that story? The Pugga Mahone story? Anyway, Dean is out riding at one time with Shirley, Mrs. Tyler at the time, may she rest. And I had just done a live commercial for Irish Spring deodorant soap. And I always tagged the spot with a phrase that was taught to me by my father, may he rest in peace, the King of Galway. And I was always Irish Spring deodorant soap. They played on the Irish green and the shamrock and that whole thing. And I said, he taught me how to say, take a shower in Gaelic, and that was Pugga Mahone. So I mentioned Pugga Mahone, and Shirley Tyler just cracked up. And Dean says, what's so funny? She says, I love it when Tom says, kiss my ass on the radio. Anyway, thank you for coming out to help us celebrate our 90th birthday. It's been a great day so far.
And then there's a man who was on the night show when I was fortunate enough to work at WIP. He's here with us today, Tom Lemaine.
First of all, Jerry, just remember, Jerry Del Cagliano, WIP News. That's all. It is, if not in chronological order, it's nice to, and actually an honor to follow my first general manager, Dick Carr, and Dean Tyler, who was, there might have been a guy that came after him, but he was my program director. Dean and I, we were one step ahead of each other when we had thoughts of what we should do at the station. Of course, my first thought and my first inkling was, when I first went on the air at WIP, was, what am I doing here? When I got called to come up to WIP, it was by the current program director at that time, Tony Taylor. And I got a phone call, and it said, Tony Taylor's on the line. I thought it was the Phillies' second baseman. And I know a little bit of Spanish, so I started conversing with this Tony Taylor in Spanish, And he said, excuse me, this is Tony Taylor, program director at WIP. Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was talking to the other guy. And he said, we're interested in seeing if you would be interested in joining us at WIP. And I said, yeah, I got an interest in that a whole lot. And I said, how did you find, because I was in Atlantic City. I mean, I broke my arm playing football when I was 16 years old, became a sports announcer at the station, and eventually, after my lifeguard duties were over, I started programming 2 stations in Atlantic City. So no, we were on the beach in Wildwood listening to you. And I said, well, that's good to know the station reaches Wildwood. And that was it. I really couldn't believe, because I'm coming to a station that already had Ken Garland, Tom Moran, Dick Clayton, Bill Weber. I said, how am I going to fit into this group? I mean, really, the most talented guys and the easiest guys to work with. Well, at the time, I think Jerry mentioned the word evolve. There was, until recently, there was never the all-new WIP. We didn't want to scare away the listeners we already had, but at the same time, we wanted to bring in new listeners. And as a result, we had, 20s? If you got a 15, you were really, now if you get a 2 or 3 rating share, you're doing real well. We were getting double-digit figures, and that's because we had 2 generations. I would have somebody come up to me and say, hey, my mom and dad are listening to you in the morning. I said, well, where were you? Oh, yeah, I was there too. The kitchen radio, whatever, it was 2 generations listening. Well, the involvement, and thanks to Dean and Dick Carr, involved getting a little fresher look at WIP. None of the guys who were on the air at that time had any experience with rock and roll. I did. I was programming a rock and roll station, and of course, down at the shore, I was a rock and roll jock. So they wanted to fuse the new music in without upsetting people who were already listening and were very, very loyal WIP listeners. So they thought that we would day part or night part some of the music at night that would eventually make its way into the daytime programming. And since I had the background in that type of music, I was given the nighttime shift, and we at night played a little different music than we did in the daytime at that time. I did that for a very short time. It was weekends at WIP, and I was still holding down a job in Atlantic City. When Gary Mack, who was the program director succeeding Tony Taylor, came in on a Sunday night, he said, I want to see you when you get off the air. Usually 2 things happen when your boss says, I want to see you, and both of them are bad. So we went over to the Bullshot, which was on Sansom Street, a bar, and Gary Mack says, what do you drink? And I said, Jack Daniels. So do I. Bingo. He said, we're making some changes at WIP, and we'd like to incorporate you in them. I said, well, you mean that was my last show? He said, no, we'd like you to start a regular shift Monday through Friday on the station. And I'm going, wait a minute. WIP, I'm a rookie here. These guys have been on the air forever at WIP. Who's going to go? Who am I going to come in? We'll talk about that later. Can you start Monday? And I said, you talking this Monday? Well, after a couple of Jack Daniels and after my nighttime shift, it already was Monday. Sunday night had evolved into Monday. Yeah, can you do that? Yeah, I guess so. Sure. Are you kidding? Yeah, I'll work it out with, no, just whatever you're doing down the shore, continue to do it as long as you can be on the air at WIP at 8 o'clock. I said, okay, fine. But I'm going, now wait a minute. 8 o'clock, he finally gave it a clue as to what shift I'm going to have. Well, that's Charlie Greer's shift. Charlie Greer, WABC, 77, New York. Evidently, Charlie was a time and temperature guy and really wasn't fitting in with, as Dean mentioned, the whole personality aspect of the station. And something that didn't work out. Well, when I show up that Monday, Charlie had been on a 2-week vacation. One of the things you know about going on vacation, you come back, maybe you don't have your job. They couldn't reach Charlie Greer. And Gary Mack is literally sitting on the steps of the Wellington building waiting for Charlie Greer to come in. In the meantime, I'm preparing to go on the air, and at that time we pulled our music from a library. And as I'm pulling some music, in walks Charlie Greer. And, hey, Tom, how you doing? What's going on? I said, have you seen Gary Mack? No, not at all. Where is he? I said, he's outside looking for you. And I was really a little bit concerned because it didn't seem to me that WIP operated this way. But that was the beginning of my 15 years at WIP. And Dick Clayton had the idea to go to CAU one time to join the talk radio folk, and that enabled me to move up to the afternoon shift. I was only on WIP 1 year when I got a call from the 76ers, actually Channel 17, that they had hired Bill Campbell and they were looking for somebody to do the games with Bill. And they wanted to know if I would do them. And well, how am I going to do that? Because I was still on the night shift. So I said, well, at least I'm going to go in and tell old man Kelly, Don Kelly, the GM at the time, so he doesn't find out from the back door that I've been offered another job. And he goes, oh, that's wonderful. No, well, I need 60 or 70 days off to do these games, because at that time, the 76ers, we were doing the away games on Channel 17, and the home games were on Prism. And Don Kelly said, no problem, go see Dean, and Dean will work out the schedule. And I'm going, yeah, like we even work out the nightmare? So on all the games, we're on the road. And, which meant, and back then we just flew commercial. We didn't have chartered flights. And I would leave Seattle or Portland doing a game and then get on the red eye and come back, do a show, and then go back on the road and meet the team somewhere else. I don't think they would ever allow something like that to happen. I mean, I was floored when the general manager said, we'll work it out. And that lasted for 6 years. And I don't think, Dean, I don't think I missed one assignment from wherever I was in the country broadcasting Sixer games and getting back to WIP. Plus, I was also doing weekend sports at Channel 3. Well, when you're in your 20s and everything's coming, you take every job that's given to you. That never conflicted. I would get off the air at WIP at 10:59 because we had a show. What was the mystery show we had at that time? We went on 11 o'clock, so I didn't go till midnight. I would leave the studios at 19th and Walnut and get to 5th and Market just in time to go on the air at 11:15 and do the sports. Now, you think that's pretty good? They allowed me to do that. That's how great this WIP was never bigger than any of the other stations. Indeed, they were, but never big enough to say, we can do this. This is, Some of those games, at the first 2 years I did the games on television, the audio was rebroadcast on 12:10, which means I was on the air opposite myself. That's incredible when you think about it. But as I said, WIP, it was okay. It's good promotion. It's good to have you doing that, and we're all in favor of you doing it. That would never happen. When I was doing Flyers post-game show on Channel 29, back then the game started at 8 o'clock, which means they weren't over until 10:45. I would go from Channel 29 to Channel 3, 2 live sports shows in the same half hour, live on 2 different stations. You think that would ever work today? Again, WIP allowed me the freedom to do all this and to, continue my career along with my radio job, my television career. Dean mentioned the personalities we had and how difficult they might have been at times. I never had a problem. When we were finally evolving into playing the 4 tops instead of the 4 aces, it was an evolvement. That's a good word, Jerry. Evolved. But Ken was from the big band era, Ken Garland, and he had problems getting into this whole new era of pop music. And Dean called me one day and said, look, he talks to you. You guys have some kind of connection that he listens to you and he seeks you out to talk to. He said, go see what you can do because I can't get anywhere with him about playing the new music. So I said, okay, I'll try. And I went in to talk to Ken one day, and I didn't get into the subject right away. Ken loved to talk about clothes. I mean, he was a walking mannequin, that guy. And so I eventually got into the subject of music. And I said, Ken, you know, you're so big in this town, you could play anything or say anything at all, and your fans would just eat it up. Oh, well, I don't know about that. Yeah, I know about that, Ken. It's true. So I'm thinking maybe if you would play some of the popular music that's out there now, even though it's not really your kind of gig, whoever your listeners are would accept it, like they accept you. Oh, well, I don't know where to begin. And I said, well, you know, Motown is pretty popular these days, and they have a lot of hit music out. And I'm thinking, for instance, Ken, beautiful song by The Temptations called My Girl. Oh, yeah, I've heard that. Well, I mean, you got to start somewhere, and I'm thinking, my girl. Okay, whatever, Ken. You're Ken, and whatever you do is going to be fine. A couple of days later, he's playing My Girl. And Dean called me in and said, what the hell did you tell him to get to? I said, Ken, if you don't play My Girl by the end of this week, you're fired. Of course, that was not the case, but it was a way of evolving into the music that WIP never became the all-new WIP. And I know the contract deals you had, Dick Carr, with the Philadelphia Eagles, CAU kept changing formats, and they decided to get back into the broadcasting of Eagles football. They wanted to. And WIP had a sweetheart deal with Leonard Toews, but CAU came at them with a triple. I think they wanted to triple the rights. And Leonard said to the management at WIP, you guys have been very good to us, but these guys are coming at us with triple the broadcast rights money. We'll do it. Whatever it is, we're staying with the Eagles. We're going to stay with them. Well, now they had to regroup some of this money, and they already had the Bill Berge show, they had the Ron Jaworski show, and they thought bringing in Tommy McDonald to do this, in deference to Howard, this was the first radio talk show. They brought Tommy McDonald in to do a 2-hour show before and after every Eagles broadcast. Now, there's nobody more popular than Tommy McDonald, really, bar none. But Tommy had never been on the air, and, you know, he's a country bumpkin from Colorado, and they said, well, they asked me to kind of hold his hand for the first couple broadcasts, and then when Tom gets comfortable, well, after a month or two, they thought Tom was comfortable, and they said, okay, Tom, and Tom McDonald said, oh, no. LeMaine stays doing the games, doing the broadcast with me, or I don't do them at all. Oh, fine, Tom, good. So Tommy and I did Eagle Talk before and after Eagles games for about 6 years, including the Super Bowl 15 year. And that was, I believe, the first sports talk that we ever had on radio, in deference to Howard, that was, I thought, landmark with Philadelphia radio broadcasting. But it was all because we needed to make more money because the Eagles charged triple what they wanted for broadcast rights. I think the one common denominator I have here is that WIP was so easy to work for, easy to work with. I never felt like I was working for them, I was working with them. And no matter what we did, it was the right thing to do. And as Dean mentioned, they gave us a free rein. They said, we knew what we were getting when we hired you guys, so just be what we knew what we were getting. And that was it. And we really had aside from the stack of memos that Tom Moran, and I remember seeing that stack in a corner, but the memos from Dean Tyler were only to keep the ship straight as to what we were doing promotion-wise. And that was good to know because what are we doing this week? Well, we're hiding something downtown Philadelphia, and Dick Clayton's going to give clues. Okay, good. That sounds good. Things like that. That was the only really stipulations we had, and Dean was the best at doing that, at keeping us all on a straight line outside of the wildness that we had away from that particular format. And I've had 38 years at Channel 3, and I only had 15. Well, I worked both over those years. They cross over. 15 years at WIP. But there was never a more happier time in my life, and I never had more fun when I cracked open the mic than I ever did at WIP. And working with guys like Tom Moran, Bill St. James, Dean Tyler, Dick Carr, made it all real easy. And if you think Howard Eskin had to be somewhere, I have to announce the 76ers games tonight at 7 o'clock, and so we're all going to make it. I'll say thank you, and once again, congratulations to the broadcast pioneers for another good program.
Thank you, Tom. And here's what we've got. We're down to our final two before we serve dinner. And it's tough to be the final two, so we're going to give them our enthusiastic applause, no doubt. But number one, earlier WIP News was mentioned, and Tom mentioned it as well, and we have someone here from WIP News, a legitimate, talented newsman who started in 1961 and who also started at a very, very tender age, as we all wind up saying we did wherever it is we went. However, he is here, Bill McCluskey.
I didn't know it was the Lipitor that was doing that to me. So I've got a script too. I also got the uniform. I think I remember playing softball against Dean and Bill on the Wibbage team when you came out to Villanova, where I was a student, and you played the college team from WWVU. And someone mentioned cranking up the RTI transmitter. We cranked up the carrier current transmitter at WWVU at Villanova one night, I think to put it up to 100 watts, and we were authorized a tenth of a watt. And it was carrier current, so this meant the entire campus is radiating 640, which you remember was a clear channel. And somebody in Alabama heard it. And they nicely called the FCC and told them what a nice job these young men were doing. We stopped doing that right away. I guess, like with that famous TV anchor man, it all started at a 5,000 watt radio station. And as everyone has said, wow, what a station. The standard advice that you got when you were young was, well, go out to Keokuk and teach yourself how to do radio. And I think I had a much better deal. I got to work at what was then the #1 station and what was then the #3 market. I don't know what it's down to now. That was July of 1961. I was entering senior year at Malvern Prep. I had worked at the Record Hop at St. Alice's in Upper Darby. Tom Brown was one of the DJs, Phil Sheridan from FIL. Frank Feller was in from Wibbage. High Lit did it for a while. But I got to know Tom the best, and my parents insisted that I get a summer job. And I mentioned that to him, and he said, well, you know, this news director is looking for I think he called it a news assistant. That was a gopher or a flunky. You changed ribbons. You came home looking like you'd voted in the Iraqi elections. Your thumb was so purple. So I lived at 69th Street, got on the subway and the L, went down to the Gimbel building, my first day of work in July of 61. And I didn't know that you could come up from the subway and go through the store and up the elevator, as someone else mentioned. So I went outside where there was a thunderstorm, where I got soaking wet. And I got up to the newsroom, and Charlie Edwards, rest his soul, was in there. Big guy, gruff guy. Avuncular might be a word. He says, Jesus Christ, kid, you're soaking wet. Now, well, yesterday there was a thunderstorm out there, see out the window. And he said, well, take those clothes off and put them over the air conditioner, you'll catch your death of cold. I said, well, Mr. Edwards, I can't take my clothes off. There are women working here. He said, kid, you gotta learn. It pays to advertise. I learned a lot at WIP. I was learning from the best: Charlie, John Paul Weber, Ivan Scott, George Spellman, David Crane, William Payne, Nat Wright, Pete Retzloff, Jim Leeming was the sports director. Later, Gordon Thomas, Bob Vaughn, Sam Hall, Andy Fisher, Ray Quinn, Ron Gold, Steve Ross, John Schubeck. I don't think you'd learn from people like that in Keokuk. I have a couple other stories, and I think the statute of limitations has passed on these. The Gimbel Building, as was mentioned, was across the street from the Ben Franklin Hotel. The honeymoon suite was directly across the street from the music library, which was next to the newsroom. And between newscasts, the newsmen would leave the kid to write the newscast so they could go, and I thought maybe they were catching a nap in the music library. Well, turns out that newlyweds don't always think about turning off the lights and drawing the curtains. And the gentleman of the news department would spend every Saturday night in the music library seeing how things got on the first night. I remember another story, and I don't remember who the disc jockey was. It might have been Marty O'Hara. But we had a candy machine in the airlock just outside of the on-air studio. And whoever this disc jockey was decided he needed some candy, so he put his money in, and he pulled the thing, and it didn't work. So we shook the machine, it didn't come out. So he reaches down, and he gets his arm up in there, and he gets his arm caught. And he can't get it out. And of course, he's in the airlock, and nobody can hear him. Well, fortunately, the engineer noticed this is when we had engineers who could play records, or the only ones who could play records. The engineer kept him covered with music until we got him extracted from the machine. Now, I mentioned the honeymoon suite. If there wasn't any action on the 12th floor, George Spellman, one of the newsmen on the weekends, would leave me to write the newscast. And he would go out into the fire escape and go up and down the different floors where there were little balconies, and he'd see if he could find anything on the 5th floor, the 4th floor, the 3rd floor. Well, one day he went too far and got down to the floor where the bank was, where the security was a little better. He went out the door to the balcony, and the door locked behind him. And I'm out there shouting, George, George, where are you? And I hear him. And I know I can't get down there, and I don't want to lock me out, too. And fortunately, the disc jockey read that newscast, and everything went fine. We talked about Paul Rust, and Paul Rust really taught me so much about what I know in the business. He taught me that I could not go to my cousin's wedding because it was on a Saturday, and damn it, I was supposed to work on Saturday. They talked about how Paul wanted you to always get the sound. One day he said, well, call Harry Truman on the phone. So I found out, I don't even know if they had area codes then, but anyhow, I found out how to dial Independence, Missouri, and I dialed this number, and by God, he answered. And I got to interview President Truman. Another night, Paul called, and Paul would drink what he called see-throughs, which were martinis. And about 8 o'clock on a Sunday night, the see-throughs would have an idea, and Paul would call and deliver the idea. Get Fidel Castro on the phone. Well, that call didn't go through. Paul would do the noon newscast most days. And as if to emphasize to the rest of we mere mortals working in the news department, we were to use sound. We were to get sound. So he would, this was the days when you use a 30-second clip. He would take the little 30-second clips, which we thought were horribly short, but it was a 5-minute newscast. And he would edit them down to 2 seconds of this and 3 seconds of that, and he'd walk into the studio with a stack of carts like this, and the most fun was to watch them drop them. And they'd all get out of order. And of course they'd be late getting into the studio, and there would be a wreck. But we all learned that you did indeed have to get a lot of sound in. And Paul's trick for this, really, because we didn't have many people on the street. I mean, I would be sent out once in a while to put a microphone up in front of the mayor's news conference. Why I was able to touch equipment, I'm not sure. The engineers union was pretty good at that time. But mostly, we got stuff over the phone. We would get Captain Clarence Ferguson calling in and telling us about the latest heroin bust. But Paul came up with this program to have news tips, and we would pay the princely sum of $25 a week for the top news tip. And he got a South Philadelphia exchange. The number was Howard 85463. And if you spelled it out on your phone, it was hotline. And everybody called the hotline. And you had to scribble down their name and their address and the time they called, because you gave it to the first caller with the biggest story. Well, I was working one night, it's 9 o'clock at night on a Sunday night. All of a sudden, the phone's ringing. And I'm supposed to be leaving. I better answer the phone. I answered. Guy tells me a plane has just been hit by lightning and knocked into a field down here in Delaware, right off 95. It had just opened, the JFK Highway, they called it. I guess it's still called that, but everybody calls it 95. And I said, okay, I got his name, and on that, recorded an interview, like I was told to do. Hang up the phone, phone rings. Answer it again. Same story. So I'm getting this from 3, 4, 5 different people. Well, the newscast is on. So I type up a plane, and we learned that it was a big plane, a jetliner. Not a jetliner. It was whatever an Electra was. Anyhow, a commercial plane had crashed, and I said it had been knocked out of the air by lightning. Well, someone mentioned that, and I got the story in, and we got it on the 9 o'clock news. Someone mentioned that Paul had been a military veteran. He was a pilot in Korea. Paul knew aircraft. Paul called. Now, it's 9 o'clock on Sunday night, probably a few more see-throughs. God damn it, kid. Where'd you get that idea? Where'd you get the idea that a plane could be hit by lightning and knocked out of the air? That's never happened. That's never happened. I don't know where you got that. Why don't you check it out before you put it on the air? I'm 18 years old or something, and I'm hearing from this Korean War veteran screaming at me about his knowledge of airplanes. Fortunately for me, about 3 years later, the National Transportation Safety Board came out with a report, and good for me, it was knocked out of the sky by lightning. Let me just tell you a couple other anecdotes that I've scribbled down here so we can get home from dinner. I remember, I think it was Harvey Glasscock used to go to Florida for vacation all the time, and you talk about listening to the kid in Wildwood. Well, he would bring kids back from Florida, and he brought back Jim Tate from WIOD in Miami, which was also at 610. And Tate was also 19. And Tate could not get his old call letters out of his head. We had signs up all over the studio, WIP. He could not get it straight, and that went on for weeks. And it hung on the microphone. They did everything they could not train the boy. I think I'll cut it off there and just say that by the time that I left, they had actually hired a woman in the newsroom, Carol Ann Kell, and eventually she was let near a microphone. Before I left Metro Media, I left after working at Wash FM in Washington. Jan Gorham had been hired as well, and I think she was the real survivor. She probably worked there more years in the newsroom than anybody but John Paul Weber. It was a great place to learn how to do radio, and as you heard, I learned a few other things along the way. My wife thinks that all the tapes I've saved are trash, and she keeps urging me to get them out of there. I know you guys feel that history is only what is saved, so this trash is about to be saved, and I'll turn it over to Jerry, and you can have it to digitize.
Thank you, Bill. And now, if you're fortunate enough to be the last person to speak, when we've all been sitting here so long that it's time to shave again, then in that case, the way you make a deal with that person is you say, if you wait until last, I will give you the sum total of all the time of the other speakers and let you have it now. That's how I worked it that way, but it's not what I'm going to do. Here's one of the most versatile WIP alum who also, like every other person that's been up here today and the ones who are not here, distinguished himself not only at WIP and beyond. Bill St. James.
Thank you, Jerry, for saying we'll be done by about 1:30. I took note of that. I heard John Paul Weber's name mentioned a number of times, and it reminded me that every year on the first day of autumn, he would, being the rascal he was, introduce himself on the newscast as John Fall Weather and snicker to himself. When I should have been attending high school, I played hooky and worked on the air at WDRC in Hartford with Don Cannon and Bob Craig, who are with us today. When I should have been attending college, being taught by the likes of John Roberts, I matriculated at the University of WIP for 6 years, which means technically I have a master's. I sent a tape, I actually sent 4 tapes, and the biggest station I dreamed send one to was WIP. And I got a call about 10 days later, and it was, hello, Bill. This is Dean Tyler, WIP. He didn't sound that much like Broderick Crawford, but to my shock, he invited me down. And even after seeing me, he took leave of his senses and offered me a job. But I was a very tough negotiator. And in the end, I ended up getting 100% of the AFTRA announcer minimum scale. My take-home pay was $210.01. And at the end of the week, that 01 made all the difference. But I was welcomed into a family that included not just on-air people, but all kinds of people whom I learned from. People like Tony Gongora, who worked in the mailroom, who was a very wise guy, and Kay Dufresne, the receptionist, who treated me like family, and Harry Bickhart, the production engineer, who tolerated me and taught me a lot. He taught Kay a few things, too, from what I understand. But, sorry. There was a brilliant engineer named Dick Steeram, who went on to work for Diebold and designed the first ATMs. And Dick revealed to me the secret of beer and ice cream. If I only teach you one thing today, get a glass of lager beer, a scoop of vanilla ice cream, and alternate. You will thank me later. But like any family, there were sibling rivalries. And I remember Bill Weber and Dick Clayton, mostly Dick Clayton, being merciless. As an example, Bill Weber always wore a hat. Dick, over a period of about 2 weeks, took to lining the brim of Bill Weber's hat with 1 layer of paper towels every day. So that after about 10 days, Bill Weber had to believe his head was expanding. And every day when he came in, the hat sat about another 1/4 of an inch higher on his head. Dick, in an effort to make Bill feel as though he were in a parade, one day filled his umbrella with confetti while he was on the air. And speaking of cash call, one day I was in the studio with Dick Clayton, and he said, you know, I'll bet some of these people, we could give them the answer and they'll still get it wrong. He calls a woman in Fishtown. He says, this is Dick Clayton calling. Can you tell me how much money is in the $161.61 WIP cash call jackpot? The woman says, 100? So I'm honored to be here, to be a member of this family. I would like to give special thanks to Dean Tyler for teaching me the virtues of hard work, Jack Daniels, and owning a Great Dane the size of a small horse. I've managed to avoid the Great Dane so far. Thank you, and Ben Gimbel, hope you're listening. We're still here.
Now we have 5 more speakers. No, this is just a wonderful, for those of us who have survived, this is a wonderful, wonderful thing that we could do together, which is to to take a look at a radio station that has always been successful with its people and with its audience, a radio station that we can speak fondly of to this day and that still is alive in another iteration and a very successful one at that. WIP was a station that was really unique because over the 90-year history, and there aren't a lot of stations that can say that, over the 90-year history of WIP, there have hardly been any downtimes in terms of its stature in the city. WIP, as you heard today, was a special place for listeners, but it was also a special place and a special destination for those of us who had the opportunity to spend some of our lives there. In fact, to me, working at WIP, whether it was for a career or for a temporary engagement, just made you better. You know, being in the building, being able to walk up to WMMR as I did in the day, and we've hardly mentioned that, but the brilliant program director, Jerry Stevens, is he here today? He's not. One of the brightest program directors of that format was right upstairs. So you could go up, you could surround yourself with talented people, the likes of which we have seen here today. A station that has transcended the decades and now transcends its frequency and its medium. It's now gone from AM to FM. And you know, someday in the future when the next generation takes over and they do everything on an iPad and iPod, and there'll be a WIP somewhere in that future. And you know, I'd like to say one more time, I'd like to do the station break, because the station break, as written by the management, was WIP Philadelphia, Great Radio 610. And it was Great Eagles Radio, and it was Great Personality Radio, and it was Great Music Radio, and it was involved with the community. What a phenomenal radio station. Well, I hope you have enjoyed this today as much as I've enjoyed being with you. And if you are associated with WIP in any way, I understand they're going to take a picture because they didn't believe it the